So hello, my name is Tommi Linnansari. I am an associate professor at the University of New Brunswick, the Department of Biology and the Faculty of Forestry and Environmental Management. I'm also a member of the Canadian Rivers Institute that originated at UNB, but now we have associates and research fellows in a number of different universities across Canada. But we still have a very strong presence here at UNB. I also hold the Atlantic Salmon Research Chair at the University of New Brunswick. It is fair to say that Atlantic salmon and really the Miramichi Atlantic salmon was the reason why I originally moved to Canada. I'm a native of Finland, but I've been here over 15 years doing salmon research, and that is my passion. Today I'll be talking to people about a new type of a program that we've been implementing or trying to implement to recover salmon populations that might be declining. And when I say new, I really actually don't mean that, because similar programs are being undertaken in a number of different rivers, in a number of different locations, especially in North America. But I guess the term that has been coined a couple of years ago, the Smolt to Adult Supplementation, or SAS, that I'll be referring to, is kind of just a new term. So I'll be going through some of the slides to help guide our understanding what the program is and what we are trying to implement in the Miramichi. So my purpose in this presentation is really trying to talk some of the known aspects of the program and really try to explain what we're actually trying to implement in the Miramichi catchment. So I will start by trying to explain what this Smolt to Adult Supplementation or SAS strategy actually is. Many people know that a common tool that is invoked many times when salmon populations are declining or are in really their last legs is some type of a stalking. And a common or traditional way is to employ traditional juvenile stalking. Of course, the stalking comes in many shades of gray, if you will, but the traditional stalking really is kind of as follows. You collect returning adults from rivers, and that may be a problem in itself if the salmon population is really in a situation where there are very few returning adults. But you have to get those eggs from somewhere. So in traditional stalking, your way of doing that is collecting adults from the wild. So then you bring them into some type of facility, usually a hatchery type of environment, where then the hatchery personnel is making a selection between a male and a female. So it's a man-made pairing to combine the eggs and the milt to make the juveniles. So that is a little bit of complicated because the fish is not making the selection who they want to be mating with. But that is the traditional side of business, if you will. So what is the new thing about the SAS program? So it is actually quite the opposite to the traditional stalking program. So I personally don't even like to use word stalking program. I like to refer to the SAS program as a keeping wild salmon alive program. So I'll try to explain a little bit how the SAS program would work. So the basic tenet is that you let the early part of the life cycle of Atlantic salmon happen in the nature. So wild Atlantic salmon are spawning wherever they are deciding, and then there are wild salmon smolts that are migrating the ocean. In the Miramichi system, roughly these are 2 to 3 year old fish. Now, at that point, we would collect some of those smolts because at the current environment, the ocean seems to be the big black box, and a very low percent of smolts are returning from that ocean migration. So we want to kind of take them aside with the hopes that we can keep alive a very large proportion of these wild smolts. So the wild smolts grow into adulthood in some type of a facility. In the Miramichi program that we are partnering with the Miramichi Salmon Association, it would be a land-based hatchery environment, but in other programs, these fish are being grown out in the sea in net pens, and so they can be either freshwater or seawater. The point is, the fish are being kept alive and grown to maturity. And as the salmon mature and they become adults, then the key point is that these wild Atlantic salmon are returned to the point where they came from. And then the program kind of says, now let's let the chips fall as they may. So these fish really become, at that point, just egg-carrying vessels. So the fish will go wherever they need to be going, or the fish is deciding what is a good location to be spawning, what is a suitable partner for me, and they either do or they don't engage in spawning activity, but the point is they will be putting more eggs into the gravel and they would be fertilized in a natural environment. What is important in that approach is that everything is happening out in the wild, and it is the natural selection from the moment that the egg comes out of that fish. It's a natural environment and natural selection that is taking the winners and taking off from the population the losers that are not going to make the cut. So that's why we think this program might be fundamentally different to traditional stocking methods. So my take-home message, I guess, regarding the SAS is that the program is trying to add wild eggs to the river. The fish will distribute them where they need to be. The nature will be selecting the best progeny, or the winners, if you will. Man is not interfering with the pairing, who's going to be spawning with who, and these fish will be carrying the wild gene. And I'll be coming back to that wild gene part a little bit later in this presentation. Important notion and a misconception also is that these release adults, we don't intend them to be an enhanced fishing opportunity. Of course, they are in the river, and a fisherman, a recreational fisherman, or a First Nation participant might capture these fish, but the intention of the program is that these salmon are distributing the eggs into the gravel. So the point is then that when these progeny will eventually, the progeny of these SAS fish will smoltify, go in the ocean, and return from that ocean journey. Those are the fish that will be enhancing the population and perhaps even bringing a boost to the fisheries component, whether it's First Nations fishery or recreational fishery. I mentioned a little bit earlier that while we oftentimes, it's almost like a Freudian slip that we say that this is a new type of thinking, the idea of small-to-adult supplementation or captive rearing of adults is actually not a new idea. There's a number of different programs, both in Canada and the United States, that has been going on for quite some time. So for example, in the Pacific Northwest, in many of the Pacific salmonids, there have been programs that are now reporting their results from 20 years of experimentation and showing generally that the programs are working very well. Similarly, here in New Brunswick, what a lot of people don't know, that we actually have had these SAS programs ongoing for quite some time. So for example, Fisheries and Oceans Canada in the St. John River has implemented a program that is now have been ongoing for over 15 years in the Tobique River. So in the Tobique River, wild pre-smolt and wild spring smolt have been collected. They are brought into the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility, and the adults go back into the Tobique River. So the program over there has been going on quite some time. We have other examples. For example, Parks Canada is doing groundbreaking work in the Upper Salmon River, also partnering with Fort Foley First Nation in the Petitcodiac River, where they are implementing the SAS programs. But what we really want to do in our program is to provide the science to show why this program actually works. And the difference to these other programs is that we want to implement monitoring, and importantly, monitoring the SAS fish compared to the wild adult salmon. And of course, we know that the wild adult salmon are the gold standard. It's the best comparison. So we can't do this kind of comparison in programs like Upper Salmon River, where there's no wild Atlantic salmon left. So that is why the Miramichi River program is going to be a fundamental building block for us to really understand the benefits and also the risks of this program.